everybody, welcome back to Pagan's Witchy Corner. My name is Pagan, and today I am joined by a new guest who is super awesome, and that is uh Annwyn Avalon. I just wanted to make sure that I always get the name pronounced correctly because you guys know, listening to the show, how easily I butcher people's names. But Annwyn, welcome to the show. I'm so happy you're here. We had a great time talking a little bit off air, but now we're going to have a great time talking about all of your books, and especially the new one that comes out when this episode airs, which is March 4th, and that is the Celtic Goddess Grimoire, and it is a fantastic book, but we're going to dive deep into it. But Annwyn, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
The book was absolutely fantastic. Obviously, I got a press copy since the book doesn't actually come out until March 4th, but the book was so good. So good. I was actually really excited about this because there's a lot of the Celtic lore, especially, that has been lost to tradition and lost to colonization, which you do touch on a little bit in your book. But the cool thing is you put so much effort into so many different goddesses that we don't really know a whole lot about, and you gave us kind of some tidbits to kind of start working with them. And obviously, because so much has been lost to colonization, a lot of the Celtic practices now kind of depend a little bit on UPG, or unverified personal gnosis. But the book was awesome. It was so good. Oh my gosh, like I could gush about it for like an hour straight, but that's not why we're here. Well, I mean, that is why we're here, but um so kind of quickly jumping into this book, because I also want to touch on your other two books, which are also supposed to be amazing, and I actually bought them this morning so that way I could dive into them, because now I'm a fan of yours. um the when you wrote this book, what kind of made you decide to write it, and why obviously take on the task of conquering so many goddesses in one book?
Oh, okay. That is a multi-layered answer to that question. The
Okay.
simple answer is my editor asked me to. Um, but the more complicated answer is that, and the reason I said yes when she asked um, was because first off, my path is my sacred path. Everything that I've done is very deeply rooted in the landscape of England,
Hmm.
um, which we can get into that a little bit more. But my mother is actually British. She was born here in the UK, and I spent my entire life just kind of being obsessed with these ancestral roots that I had. And I was always drawn to these goddesses. And I was like, I went to Bath and visited the Bath Museum where the goddess Sulis,
Hmm.
the first goddess entry in the book is Sulis, like when I was 5. And then again and again. And it just, it's so powerful when you can connect with these goddesses in their landscape. And also another reason is that you really can't take water out of practices that surround the Celts, their descendants, and the more modern cultures like that are here in the UK. Which I'd love to talk about in a few minutes, like the word Celtic, because I think we should tackle that a little bit
Oh,
because that can be
absolutely.
it can be a bit uh
Misconstrued?
too yeah, and too big of an umbrella term. But let me keep myself focused here because the question was, why'd you decide this? But you really can't take water out of these Celtic goddesses because so many of them are deeply connected to water, a body of water, a sacred well, or derive from it. I think I'm pretty sure that the only goddess that I could not find a body of water or something watery connected to her was Andraste.
Hmm.
And that's only because we have almost zero information about her. But that every other goddess is somehow connected to water or has water as part of her story. Um, or is found like the tribe that worshipped her lived on this river. or she is a hot spring goddess, or she is a sacred spring goddess, or she's named after the sea, or this river is named after her. You know, the Celts, when we're talking about the Celts, like the Iron Age Celts, like the people, the ancient people, they often lived on water. Like for example, here in Glastonbury, where I live, it's not been open for a couple of years, but there used to be a little museum that had all these artifacts from the Celtic Lake Village. And so there's this deep connection to it. And then you have the added layer of the um, the sacred wells and how important they were to the Celtic people and how they are still so important to the people that are now living in this landscape. There's I mean, at one point, it was said that there were 3,000 wells, sacred wells, in Ireland alone. But it's not just Ireland. I mean, they're everywhere. Scotland has them, England has them, Wales, Cornwall, even in the continent, France. I mean, there's just so many of these sacred springs. And so many of them have a deep connection with these goddesses. So, my first two books were about water. And
Hmm.
so this it honestly could have been called like the Celtic Water Goddess Grimoire. Um because there's just you I said this to a friend the other day, like you can take me out of the water, but you can't take the water out of me. And so it's you will see as you read through it that there is this theme. It is woven together with water. And I love the cover of the book too, because there's this beautiful Celtic goddess holding this bowl of water.
Yes,
So
beautiful, beautiful cover. And the cool thing is too that one thing I think that and we can talk about this too if you'd like to, is that all of these sacred wells also connect to the other world and the different liminal beings and liminal spaces. And so having those different connections to the other world, and also not only that to these goddesses, you're kind of interweaving all of these different types of worlds together through water. And if you are new to paganism, you will find that water is very sacred, not only in paganism, because it bridges that divide. It is somewhere between a magical being itself and also a connector to the other worlds and the deities themselves. And often you just kind of hear go with the flow and those kinds of things, and it's all water related. So I love it, and I think it's so cool. And um probably, as you were saying, Andraste, she is one of those goddesses that I'm just like, I love you because I love the story of Boudica. And
yes,
Boudica's story just like it ignites that fire in my veins. I'm like, yes, go get her. Go do it. And I love it. It's
same.
so good.
Oh, oh my gosh, right? Because I included Boudica in there because you
Hmm.
can't talk about Andraste without talking about Boudica. Like
Right.
in fact, it's the only information that we have about Andraste is through Boudica. But yeah, like I mean, Boudica to me is a like elevated ancestor. She is like an what people nowadays might call like an ascended master, right? To
Hmm.
me, she is like this ancestral wisdom for the power of feminine rage. And I have called on her as an ancestral spirit to aid me in some of the activism work that I do around water. And and colonization. She is at least within the Celtic framework, she is the original stand up to the colonizers, those Romans. Um, and I mean, she's just so powerful. For those that don't know, of course, you'll learn a little bit in the book, but um, she was basically the consort of this Celtic tribal leader, king, for lack of a better word, and he passed away. And the Romans had already invaded, and at this point there was cooperation, which the story we could see it play out in such a modern context too, where the Romans showed up he made a deal with the Romans that, when, he passed away, like they'd get part of his lands and this and that and the other, but that's not the Celtic way. In the Celtic tribes, women held positions. They could
Mhm.
hold office. They could have jobs. They could, they weren't subservient. They were equal. And so he, made a deal for peace with the Romans. But then when he died, she felt that the Romans should not get her land. They should not, they had no rights to it. It belonged to her daughters. It was their inheritance.
Mhm.
And the Romans basically were just like, no, it's ours. We're going to take it. And she opposed them and she stood up to him. And because of it, she was whipped and her daughters were publicly assaulted
Mhm.
in a quite nasty way. And she retreated for a little bit and she rallied all of the Celtic tribes. And because it wasn't just one Celtic tribe, it was very tribal, different groups. And she rallied all of them together and then absolutely whooped the Romans' butts. And to have a woman leading a battle army that slaughtered like legions of Romans was not only like showing her power and how powerful she was as a leader and as a queen and as a woman, but that was so embarrassing for the Romans
Oh, yeah,
to have
because
a
they were a
woman.
male-driven society.
Exactly. And so to have this woman just slaughter them was, yeah, that, I mean, it's just so powerful. It's the reason why she makes it into the history book.
Mhm.
And she did it with the, blessing and the power of one of these Celtic goddesses, which I think, Andraste, which I think also goes to show how powerful these goddesses are, especially when it comes to protecting what's ours and our land from greedy, Romans, or in a modern context, greedy corporations or people that see what you have and they think it's nice and they power grab for it just because they're bigger and better, and have more money and more uh, more legions or more money. We can see this parallel with the Romans and like modern day colonization, and it gives me so much hope, to be honest, when it comes to um, environmental activism
Mhm.
and water activism and activism for humanity, to be able to stand up against these big greedy corporations. They're just taking our natural resources, destroying our planet.
Mhm.
Um, so, anyways, I think I got on a side quest here.
That's okay.
Um,
We are all about the activism around here as well. So that is a wonderful side quest to be on. And honestly, a lot of the Celtic goddesses, and I know that it bridges a little bit into, the Germanic and like Norse deities as well, because I think you touched a little bit on it in the book that when, like different groups would come in, such as like the Vikings and all that, they would not try to change, the practices of the people that were there. They would try to kind of get along with them, even if they were doing, some things like raiding and pillaging and all that other stuff. But they wouldn't try to come in often like the Romans and the Christians did and force a new religion. They would honor what was already there. And so kind of understanding that history a little bit and understanding that these were also different cultures that had similar types of deities, their own pantheons, but similar types of deities. And understanding that they also had similar types of practices in terms of women were considered equals. A lot of times in Norse societies and Germanic societies, women were considered equals to men. They also held positions of power. They held different types of positions that some men couldn't hold, such as if you were a practicer or a practitioner of like Seder or any of those kinds of things, then obviously that was more feminine than masculine, even though there were masculine practitioners. But understanding that kind of concept of how the different parts of the world all kind of interlinked with each other before, and for those of you who listen to my show that might be Christian or Christian witches, we're not ragging terribly on Christianity. We're talking about the history of it. So just for context. So, and understanding that, yes, there was a very deep level of colonization. And they didn't just come in and be like, no, we want your land and we want to take over. they destroyed historical records and artifacts that made it so that people, the generations going forward, weren't able to truly remember what happened. That's why a lot of the lore, such as Andraste's lore, we don't have because it was destroyed.
Right. All we have are like letters back from like the Romans to Caesar
Mm-hmm.
recording this. So in a way, they did preserve some of it, but they preserved it from the view and the guise of the oppressor.
Right.
Um, the savage Celts. Well, maybe they weren't as savage as the Romans say they were, but then the Christian Church did something similar in a way that when they arrived and started bringing Christianity to the Celtic lands, they built their churches on top of the sacred sites, which is why so many of the churches around here in the UK have things like holy wells.
Mm-hmm.
Or again, going back to Sulis, the first goddess entry in Celtic Goddess Grimoire, um, there the Celts worshipped Sulis first at a place called Crossbath. Then the Romans came and they built their huge water temple to Sulis Minerva,
Mm-hmm.
their kind of their version of that local goddess. And then that fell into, that fell into disrepair for a while. And then Christianity shows up and boom, they built this huge, beautiful cathedral on top of the site. And
Right.
it gets buried under layer under layer under layer until like the 1700s. Gotta love them, you know, Regency and Victorian Georgian era aristocrats, because they started doing archaeological excavations, and that's when they found the Roman temples, and then they went deep and deeper, and then they could find some of the Celtic stuff, and so while it has been erased, it's less. It's interesting. There is some erasure, but it's also very much like they buried it, and so the deeper we go, the more we can uncover,
Right.
which I think is amazing. And they're doing these excavations still in Bath, and like I always hope and pray and sprinkle a little magic to like just go down one more layer and find like those Celtic artifacts. Um, but we do know where the Celts worshipped Sulis, because the Romans and inadvertently ended up preserving it.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I do have to give credit to the Romans for. They were just like, we're gonna change it, but not a lot. Just a little bit. Like Sulis
Just
Minerva.
enough to do
You
that.
still get to keep
Yeah.
Sulis. It's just now Sulis Minerva. Which kind of circling back a little bit to Boudica, when you were talking about how she's one of the kind of great ancestors. I don't know if you have read the book, I believe it's Powerful Juju by Naja Lightfoot or
I
Najah
have
Lightfoot.
not, but
Um,
I know who she is, but I have not read that book.
the book is really great, and she kind of talks about how some of the deities that she mentions in the book are not traditional deities. They're more what we would consider to be man-made deities, or people of reverence that have kind of ascended to that deity like status, almost a demigod kind of status. And I want to say that I don't remember the woman's name, but she talked about this beautiful woman who just had this horrible experience and just terrible life. Her husband was awful, but she was able to be preserved through kind of remembrance of her pain and understanding that she was able to kind of overcome her pain in the afterlife, and that has now gone on to help different people who have kind of revered her a little bit get over their own types of pain while still in this life. And so I think that Boudica is probably more ascended to that kind of, at least in my eyes, I think, because she's so revered in so many ways, not just as a historical figure, but as almost a divine feminine figure, that she's almost ascended to that like a demigod kind of status at that point, because she's so damn powerful. Holy crap, she's so
I know.
cool.
I know, right? No, I totally agree with you. Because I mean, to me, she has that, yeah, that power of the goddess, and like there has been days when I have been raging about some, awful environmental injustice or some power grab for water, when I have said something like, I have the rage of Boudica like flowing through my veins. She's, like it's that ancestral, like, that ancestral memory, or that connection to that, where I'm just like, no. And I think what's really cool about it too is it doesn't demonize feminine rage or
Right.
feminine power. It is
Exactly.
like, look how she stood up to these oppressors. Look at how she fought for her landscape, for her people, for her daughters, and in a way that is yeah. Oh, I got chills. Um, where she's so powerful that, I mean, hundreds, thousands years later, we're sitting here on a podcast in the modern day talking about her. Like, I wish that I had a TARDIS and I could go back in time
Right.
and just be like, "Hey, Boudica, like, I know everything's rough for you right now, but your rage is going to inspire women for generations to come."
Yes.
Like,
Yes. I love it. Oh my God, I love it. It's so good. She's honestly, I would say that because, that's kind of, if you really want to get into the like deep esoteric aspects of it, when you really kind of get into those energies of like creating like tulpas and stuff like that, the more you kind of give a being energy, the more power they can assume. And it's kind of that similar kind of thing. And so I think that, yeah, maybe over the course of thousands of years of remembering Boudica and her feminine rage, maybe she has ascended to that kind of thing where she is now what we could consider a man-made goddess of feminine rage. And honestly, I love it for her and I love it for us.
yes.
So, um, anywho, before we get too deep down another rabbit hole of amazingness, especially because there's so many great goddesses and you've touched on so many, and unfortunately we just don't have the time to dig deep into all of them. So this is going to be that shameless plug moment, everyone. So if you've listened to my show, you know that this is the moment where you need to go buy the Celtic Goddess Grimoire. And if you can't afford a copy or you aren't able to get a copy at this time, go request one at your local library. Most local libraries will probably not have one by the time this podcast airs. So go into your library, say, hey, I would like a copy of this. Can you find one or buy one? Local libraries will do that. Absolutely. So make sure you're doing that. Support your authors, support your local libraries, support your local bookstores. They'll do the same thing. They'll go buy a copy for you. So yeah, do that. Pick up a copy because the book is actually really fantastic. It has so much information in it and so much great ways for you to really get started working with some of these deities. But obviously a lot of these deities, it's going to kind of be, this is a starting point for you. It's not the end all be all, but
Yeah.
it is a really great starting point. So go pick up a
I'm
copy.
glad I'm so glad that you brought that up, because when I first started writing this, I thought that I was going to like write 7 chapters about each goddess. At least that's what I wanted to do. And as I got deeper and deeper into it, it's what I was like, oh, I have to. Like, I'm doing an injustice to each of them by not putting more information. But it was impossible. I did have a word count limit that I went over, but they still graciously let me go over it. But I was halfway through the book when I wrote my editor to be like, I'm at word count. Help, because there's like 3 more books in here. But we did whittle it down to a point where this is, like you said, a starting point. And you'll notice that goddesses like Brigid and the Morrigan, who have really big followings and who have a lot of information, entire books, like multiple entire books written about them. There's not as much about them in this book because there's other goddesses that are obscure that I really wanted to kind of highlight and be like, hey, there's more. But of course, I do touch on, Brigid and the Morrigan,
Mhm.
because you can't write a Celtic
Of
Goddess
course, you can't
Grimoire
write a Celtic
without.
book without them.
Right. So,
Yeah, and there's some really great authors who especially I believe, I hope I'm getting her name right because I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I want to say it's Morgan Daimler or Daimler.
oh,
Um
I think, yeah, Morgan Daimler.
yeah, Daimler.
Yeah.
She wrote some really great Morgan books. She also has one on Brigid. And she also has one, I believe, on Hecate as well, so that's really great. Also, Stephanie Woodfield has fantastic books about the Morgan, and there's so many. And there's one that's called I believe it's priest devotee priest is it devotee? Stephanie Woodfield is something with devotee, and I don't remember off the top of my head. It's on my bookshelf, but I don't remember. But anyway, she talks about the Morgan. She talks about a lot of different Celtic deities, but she really gets into talking about Ain and Anu, which are really great deities, which also are touched on in your book as well. So if you're looking for more references, there's some really great places for you to start. But we're gonna
I'd also like
segue.
to
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
quick, I was gonna say, I'd also like to shout out Courtney Weber
Courtney
because
Weber.
she
Yes,
also
thank you.
yes, she's also got a great book on Brigid and a great book on the Morrigan.
Yes, and I believe she also has a really great book on Hecate as well because I love Courtney Weber. She's amazing as well. Um,
Yeah.
such great authors, such great human beings. I've talked to two of those three. I have not talked to Morgan, which I should probably get her on the show at some point in time. But
She's
anyway.
such a wealth of knowledge.
So you also have two other books out, which we kind of I want to touch on a little bit before we run out of time, which is The Way of the Water Priestess Entering the World of Water Magic. And that one came out, what, 2021? Yeah, January 2021. Which I didn't know existed until today, which I'm kind of sad that I didn't because your writing is amazing. So let's talk a little bit about that one and what kind of made you decide to write, obviously, a book about being a water priestess or the way of the water
Yeah,
priestess.
absolutely. Okay, but before we can talk about the way of the Water Priestess, we have to go back even further
Oh, to
and
water
talk
magic?
about water witchcraft.
Water witchcraft, yes. So,
Yes.
yes, we'll talk about that.
Lilith Dorsey is water magic, and she wrote the book Water Magic. Which, side note, she's going to be a speaker at my Water Priestess Confluence coming up in April. But so I started my very first book that I published was called Water Witchcraft: Magic and Lore from the Celtic Tradition, and that's what started it all. And so, oh my gosh, I started writing that way back in 20 15 maybe. I was going through my email the other day and realized that I sent my proposal in 2017. It takes forever to get books published.
Mm-hmm.
I sent my proposal in 2017 and then it came out in 2019. But that one, it also touches on some Celtic goddesses, and honestly, like all three, it's kind of a progression in a way, because water witchcraft starts with all of the folk magic. It's all of this folk magic, sacred wells, and all of the different bodies of water. And there are some goddesses woven into it because, again, you just cannot take water out of Celtic practices, or the Celtic landscape or the Celtic spirits. And you had mentioned earlier that water was kind of like this portal into the other world, and that is very much what water witchcraft touches on, is all of these spirits, the kelpie, the shellycoat, the blue men of minch, mermaids, you know, all of these types of watery beings. A couple of water goddesses are in there, and then it's also split into bodies of water. So it's like sacred well witches and lake witches and sea witches and fin folk, which is like a general term of like water spirits. And so that, when I wrote that, I went way over word count. I was contracted for about 50,000 and I turned in somewhere in the 90s. And my editor came back to me and was like, I love you, but no. Um, and it actually, Water Witchcraft, it started out kind of also having a lot of the about 30,000 words from Water Witchcraft ended up getting cut. And because she made me make the hard decision, and I had to make that hard decision of like what to cut, and I ended up cutting all of this like water priestessy things. So after that book came out, after Water Witchcraft came out, I took a break, and then I went on pilgrimage here to the UK, and I did like this big Avalonian water pilgrimage, visiting all these sacred sites and standing stones and all this kind of stuff. And I came like I was in meditation and I just got this like it's time. Like you need to finish it. Put it together, send it in. And so I sat down and I furiously wrote the rest of the book. So I took those 30,000 words and put them together with some more and came together with Water Priestess because that is very much about sacred stewardship to our natural bodies of water,
Hmm.
because our natural bodies of water on this planet are the dwelling places and the portals for the water spirits. So kind of like water spirits and folk magic and things came first, and then it came to Water Priestess, where yeah, it's all about walking this sacred path. And it does with the word priestess in there, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's about lording our power over others. I know that priestess can oftentimes get a little bit of a bad rap because people have had trauma around, um, religious authority figures.
Right.
But
Yeah.
and I back in 2010, I had I went through my witchcraft training and I did this training where when I was initiated as both a witch and a priestess, and I was fine with using witch, but priestess was like really big. It was heavy.
Hmm. It's a heavy
It was like
term.
it's yeah, it was like such a responsibility. It was just a big responsibility, and I I shied away from it for a little while because I really didn't feel like I could fill those shoes. But then one day, while meditating in water, um, the the water spirits basically were like, it's not about being in this place of power. It is about being a humble servant
Hmm.
to the water. And water can be such, that could be water spirits, water goddesses, bodies of water, the water in our own body. But it was about being in sacred service to that. And so I started like really realizing that it could be a path of activism, a sacred path of activism, but also a sacred path of just being in service to these bodies of water, to the water spirits. And then, of course, those water spirits sometimes being goddesses. And for me, it's, everything in this very Celtic framework. But it's because the water is just so woven throughout everything. It's so present, and it's not just in the Celtic world either. I mean, it's worldwide, which is why you can have a water priestess in Brazil or in Chile or in in all these different places in the world and through different spiritual practices and spiritual avenues,
Hmm.
because water's so universal, and it's in danger. It's constantly being polluted. People are monetizing water. They're selling water. Don't even get me on selling water or machines for water. Like I have a whole thing, but it just drives me nuts. Um, and like now I live in Glastonbury, and one of the things that I do here is that I help to um, I volunteer at the White Spring, and the White Spring is it's there's two parts to it. One of them is it's this old Victorian well house turned into a water temple. How cool is that?
That is
Uh,
cool.
and I'm the ceremonialist, so they don't call it high priestess because terms,
Yep.
but it's basically the ritual priestess. So I facilitate the public rituals. But another part of the White Spring that I don't think a lot of people realize is it's the source of drinking water for our town.
Hmm.
Well, actually, we do have like Bristol water that like pumps into our houses, but it is free flowing and it's free. It is there's a tap outside that constantly flows straight from the earth to this little tap on the outside, and it's constant flow, and everyone comes to the watering hole and gathers this clean, fresh, free drinking water. And that's part of water priestessing, is being able to help support that and to facilitate other people getting free access to drinking water, just sacred drinking water.
Hmm.
Um, and so yeah, and also there we have the goddess Brigid is inside of the White Spring itself, and so I help to keep her shrine. And there's other deities and beings enshrined in there as well. But this is like all part of it, you know. It's like there's so many different ways to water priestess, and it's everything from some people are called to sing to the water and to be gentle and have these beautiful practices around, gentle water priestessing. Others are called to heal the water and to help, like activism, cleaning the riverbanks and ocean cleanups and different things like that. And others through energy work, and then others through, like fierce activism and taking on corporations. So it's everybody has their part to play, and there's so many different ways to be in the water priestess practices.
I think that is absolutely amazing. And obviously the books are going to be, if you haven't picked up a copy already, like I said this morning, I didn't realize they even existed until today. So I went out and bought copies. So now they are added to my library, which is awesome. And I can't wait to dive into them. And the work that you're doing is just so fantastic and so important, especially in today's society when we sometimes take the act of having fresh usable drinking water available kind of for granted. So it's kind of one of those things that you're doing such great work, and I would love to dive more into the priestess stuff, but I know that we are almost out of time. So I definitely want you to come back so we can talk more about that, and I would love to have a conversation about activism and witchcraft with you because I think that'd be so amazing. So we'll book that because I think it would be awesome. And
Can I quickly plug? I know I
yes.
mentioned it earlier, but because there's so many different ways to water priestess, and it comes through so many different guises and so many different spiritual paths. I've put together with fellow water priestess Lorelei Black, who writes books on Aphrodite,
Mhm.
um, and so her and I co-facilitate and co-host the Water Priestess Confluence. It's our second year this year. We have 43 speakers.
Oh, wow,
Uh,
that's amazing.
and it ranges from everything where like healing with the dolphins and whales to water science to voodoo to sacred baths, to working with Aphrodite, working with Sabrina, which is the goddess of the river Severn. I'll be doing Waters of Avalon, but it brings together all of these water wisdom keepers, and like I know that I'm not for everybody, but I believe that water priestessing can be for almost anyone except for those greedy corporations. um, um, but but it gives everybody a chance to come together and to share and to celebrate water, to celebrate the feminine voice of water. So that's April this year, 5th, 6th, and 7th, and you can find out the details at waterpriestess.com.
There we go. Well, that was one of my next questions for you is gonna ask you what events you have coming up, and you already beat me to it. So there we go.
Oh,
Also, where can people find you on social media?
Okay, great. So you can find me pretty much everywhere under Annwyn Avalon, Annwyn Avalon. I'm Annwyn Avalon on Facebook, um, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram. I think I'm Waters of Avalon on Twitter, but I also never use Twitter.
Yeah.
Um,
A lot of people don't use Twitter anymore, so that's okay.
Um, and you can find me in 3 different places. If you're looking for just general Anwyn things, you can find me at anwynavalon.com. If you want Water Priestess Confluence, Water Priestess Training, Water Priestess interviews, because I do written and video interviews with other water priestesses. All of that is on the waterpriestess.com platform. And if that doesn't really appeal to you and you're kind of like, I want to hear more about that folk magic and all that witchcraft stuff, then you can find me over at waterwitchcraft.com, where I have a whole bunch of classes on water magic, water witchcraft, and where Lorelei and I co-host Bewitching the Waters Symposium, which is it's not all women like the Water Priestess Confluences. It's open to anybody, men, women, non-binary folks, everyone in between, um, and it is about witchcraft and water, folk magic, sorcery, all sorts of like cool dark water things.
Oh, that's awesome. So, everybody who's listening, all those links will be in the show description. You will be able to find out all of the really great stuff. Also, book links will also be in the show description. So, if you need a very quick way to find the books, they will all be right there in the show description for you. But and when this has been amazing, you're gonna have to come back because we just didn't have enough time to talk about all the cool stuff today. So we're gonna have to do it again very soon. But this has been absolutely wonderful, and thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. Yeah, like you said, it's been so good, and I can't believe the time like has gone by so
I
fast because
know it's been so
we could talk for
fast.
another hour.
I know, right? So everyone who's listening, thank you so much for listening to us. We had such a great time, obviously, and I hope that you enjoyed it as well. Make sure you check out all the links in the show description. Take care of yourselves, be kind to each other, and I will see you all next time. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.